Welcome to the Magic Minds podcast. Dr. John Vervaeke, a cognitive scientist that is making waves with his lectures online, that I first came across when I saw his lecture, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, blowing up on YouTube. It was this amazing intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, and communicated in such an easy to follow way that, well, it kind of lit the internet on fire. And our conversation was in front of a live audience here in Venice Beach, California. So I'm excited for you all to get to hear it. So without any further delay, let's get into it with Dr. John Vervaeke on the Magic Minds podcast. Welcome, John.
Thank you, James. It's a great pleasure to be here.
This is we have had a conversation before, and by the way, with the rescheduling, they said we can do it on Saturday at 5 p.m., but you'll have to do your own AV equipment. I said, I don't know what that stands for, but we'll figure it out. So you might see me fiddling with this speaker here as we calibrate for the room. But John, we've chatted before.
Mm-hmm.
And a few times, and once on my podcast.
Yes.
And I have watched I ended up watching episode 1 through episode 50 twice.
Wow.
So I really went down the rabbit hole of your work. But for people that might not be aware, do you mind giving a little bit of an overview of you and your work?
Let me start with my work. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. I'm appointed both in psychology and cognitive science. So I'm a cognitive psychologist, a cognitive scientist. I have also degrees in philosophy. And I do work. I'm also the director of the cognitive science program. I do work on the nature of intelligence, the nature of rationality, the nature of wisdom, mindfulness, meaning in life, altered states of consciousness, mystical experiences. Those are sort of the area I do academic, scientific work on. And some of it gets, very nuts and bolts, neuroscience, artificial intelligence. But then I also take all of those tools and try to create a bridge between science and spirituality. How can we use the best of our cognitive science to give people access to a deeper understanding of spirituality that will address something I imagine we'll talk about, the meaning crisis. Many people no longer feel that they have a home within one of the legacy religions, one of the fastest growing demographics are the nuns, the NONES, meaning they have no official religious identity. But the vast majority of those people aren't sort of simple secularists or simple atheists. The vast majority of them describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. And so there is this increasingly two large groups of people, spiritual but not religious, and also, as you described, people who are pervasively convinced that their lives are meaningless. And so there's a sense in which I don't like the word spiritual, but I'll just use it for now. There's something of a spiritual crisis.
Why don't you like it?
I don't like the word spiritual because it opens you up to a lot of the way of thinking about meaning and wisdom and transformation and mystical experience that buys into a particular framework, a particular sort of almost mythological framework that exacerbates the problem. So what I mean by that is, for many people in the West, now this isn't a universal phenomenon, so I'm speaking, for many people in the West, they understand spirituality in terms of a two-world model, a natural world and a supernatural world. And for many people, they find it almost impossible, all the apologetic gymnastics aside, to reconcile a supernatural world with the scientific world. This science pushes us towards an integrated worldview, and that model puts us towards a two-world view, and they're in profound conflict. So you get various strategies. One is, simple denial of there being any value to spirituality. The other is a simple rejection of the scientific worldview. You also have the problem that the scientific worldview, while being in some ways very comprehensive, fundamentally leaves us out of the picture. And so I think that way of thinking about spirituality, I think it has a important historical reason why it arose. I explore that in this series. But I think that way of thinking about spirituality actually alienates most people from understanding it. Or they go the opposite way. They fall into an indulgence of the supernatural, non-scientific, and they get into all kinds of woo, right? And so I think the word spiritual is the word we have to use. But because for many people it puts them into that mindset that is, I would argue, a proper part of the problem of the situation. That's why I'm hesitant around the word.
The conversations with you and as well as just your work is so fun because it, not only as a cognitive scientist, is it the confluence of psychology, of neuroscience, of philosophy, and in this beautiful confluence of many different disciplines, but also your style also is a confluence of history, of deep understanding of the history behind philosophy, the history behind these movements, why certain massive tectonic things took place in certain times and places, and then 500 years has this adverse or beneficial effect. But you could trace it back. You do a great job of tracing it back to these things that most people would overlook, would see them as disconnected. In fact, one of my favorite things about our podcast episode was we went through, I think it was 2,500 years of philosophy in 2 minutes. So I do want to touch on that because it is so brilliant to just ask you these one-liners, rapid fire one-liners of these lighthouses of philosophy throughout history. But starting with just what you touched on before we jump into meaning crisis and your recognition of even doing that lecture series, can you walk me back to your story, and when that bridge or the recognition of wanting to be this bridge between science and spirituality began?
Yeah. So I was brought up in not just my nuclear family, but my extended family was fundamentalist Christian, very strict. And I was in my mid-teens, and this is so cliche, of course, right? And I read a book by Roger Zelazny called Lord of Light that introduced me to Buddhism and Hinduism. And then I read Hermann Hesse, and then I read Robertson Davies, and introduced me to Jung, and I just got blown open. And I came to reject that framework that I was brought up in. But the thing about a religious heritage is you know how we talk about people having a mother tongue, like the tongue that they were brought up in? Like you have a mother religion. Even if you come to reject it, it gets into the very grammar of how you perceive and think about the world. So if I can extend that metaphor, it left a taste for transcendence in my mouth. And I had been given this role model of a sage, Jesus of Nazareth, that of course haunted me in a profound way. But I could not accept Christianity as it had been presented to me. In fact, I've come now, after therapy and other reflection, to realize that I had actually been deeply traumatized by that.
Do you mind elaborating? Please feel free to say.
No. It's been enough time, and there's been enough rapprochement with Christianity. I can talk about it. Plus, I trust you. Well, you're Americans. You probably know about this. There's the idea of the rapture, that just before the emergence of the Antichrist, Jesus will return, and all the born-again Christians will be caught up, but those who are not will be left behind. I think there was a movie.
Left Behind. There's a book series that was, when I was probably 12, 13, was all the rage in Dallas, Texas, in the neighborhood that I grew up in.
So I came home, and I'm old enough that it was still okay to walk home as a little kid from school. And so I walked home, and there had never been this before. I got home and there was nobody home. And I was convinced that the rapture had occurred. I had been left behind. I was clearly evil. and the Antichrist was around the corner. And
How old were you?
I'm like 10. I don't remember, and I've been in a hospital, deathly ill, and I've seen the doctors have that look on their face, which is, oh crap, this guy's gonna die. And I could see that in their face. That was not a pleasant moment. I would take that moment over that moment of trauma.
Wow.
And then there was another moment. I'll just do two to give you a sense of it. So I read the Bible I've read the Bible like 7 times, and I studied it, and I read it every day, and I was reflecting on it. And of course, I came across a passage where both Jesus talks about it at one point, and Paul talks about it, about the unforgivable sin. But they don't tell you what it is, which is the most noxious thing you could do. Because people are like, well, what is it? Like, did I drink out of the glass inappropriately? Like, what's the unforgivable sin? And I don't know what it is. So, you know how when you don't know, it's the black hole that anxiety can project anything into. So I got into this spiral and I was convinced, and I was terrified that I was going to commit the unforgivable sin, or I had done it and I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't do anything about it because even God couldn't forgive the unforgivable sin. And so my mother could tell that I was getting into like a serious state of distress. I was distraught, on despair, and I'm a kid, right? So she actually took me to the pastor of the church, and I have a very clear memory of this. And I'm not here to slang on him. This is how it was for me, right? And he said the most useless platitudinous stuff to me. And I could tell my mother realized he's not helping. And she tried to smooth it out and, oh, John, you're a good kid, and all that. And it was like, and I went, and at that was an unhealed scar. Right?
Your age for this one?
I was like 13. And then it's within 2 years that, right, I started encountering this literature. And it's like, wait, there's a way of being in the world that doesn't commit me to this stuff. And the thing was, I want to be careful here. The role model of Jesus was shining through the BS that had been wrapped around it. But I was not seeing a lot of role models in the church I belonged to. I saw people who had magazine smiles covering over a gnawing anxiety. And it was like, this isn't the good life. I could even remember that as a kid. And that's not because the people in my family weren't loving people. They were. And so I pulled away from that, and it's like a visceral tearing to do so. And there's a period of confusion, because part of it is a wound that needs to heal, but part of it is also the religion was, I would now argue, was plugging into something vital and important to a good human life. And so I had to spend time pulling those apart, and then can I recover from the trauma, separate from the trauma, that taste for transcendence, and what does that look like? And what happened was I had my own meaning crisis in high school because of that. I was going around writing on the walls. This is when you still did graffiti, right? In high school, it was like, there is no purpose, right? And stuff like that. And life is...
You do resemble a graffiti artist. That's with the blazer and everything, yeah. As a professor.
So I was doing all of that, and then I went, and I got like really interested in, like I said, this literature, and I wasn't quite clear to me how I was. And I went in and I decided to take a philosophy course in university, and I read The Republic by Plato, and I encountered the figure of Socrates, and that went like, that's who I want to be.
What about it, if you can take us back?
Socrates.
And also, how did it compare and contrast with the other sage you were familiar with at that point in Christ?
So Socrates showed me, and this is something that's, I think, a problem for the society, because we're post the Enlightenment, we're post the Romantic Revolution, we're post the Reformation, etc. But Socrates showed me that one could cultivate wisdom and connectedness to what is ultimately real and therefore sacred, while pursuing profound rationality and knowledge, which was not what I had been presented with. I had been presented with the decadent romanticism that has crouched into all of religion, which is religion, spirituality, religion are the antithesis of reason. And they are enemies, and you must ultimately choose one before the other. And I realized, well, that's just a lie. Here's a figure that is doing both seamlessly. And then I got opened up to the whole Platonic tradition, in which one is simultaneously cultivating the spirit and cultivating reason. And I don't mean what Descartes did to reason. I don't mean logic. I mean the overcoming of self-deception, the affording of self-transcendence, the ability to enter into deep, transformative, dialogical relationship with people.
I can already tell this is going to be a fun conversation, and there will be Q&A afterwards, so please feel free to queue up your questions. But the reason I can tell this is going to be a fun conversation, this is going to be, the only way to have it is almost like Tarantino style of different time frames based on things that are mentioned that are relevant in this arc of our conversation that I want to touch on, but then we might go back and revisit a more chronological time. But what you just said of the decadence of romanticism, I know that you're not saying this from just a casual street talk way. You mean this in an academic sense.
Oh, yeah, very much.
And can you elaborate on the decadence of romanticism? When you say that, what do you mean? And then also that reading, that exposure to Socrates and through Plato, was there a sense of like rescuing that wisdom from the past or discovering it?
Which would you like me to answer first?
First, could you build on what you mean by decadent romanticism?
So romanticism, the Romantics won, by the way, in convincing us that it's a philosophical position. It's a philosophical, artistic position. It's the first attempt to create a replacement spirituality for religion post the scientific revolution. That's what Romanticism is. And it's a pan-European phenomena. So it's not only philosophy, it's also art. Beethoven is considered a romantic composer. So Romanticism is a philosophical, artistic, and political movement. 18th
and 19th century?
So it starts sort of post-Kant. Goethe is an important figure in it. And of course, Kant is influenced by the Hegelians, the early Romantics. Rousseau is an important godfather of Romanticism. So if you think of the hallmark of the Enlightenment, it's John Locke's empiricism. So the hallmark of John Locke's empiricism is that the mind is a blank slate. Now this is radical at the time because he's fighting against a model, the aristocratic model, that people are born with their constitution in place and therefore they belong in a particular place in society. And so it's initially a radical proposal that human beings are blank slates and therefore they can be...
Anyone can be king.
Well, yeah. Now it sounds all wonderful, but you have to understand that empiricism also justified child labor. Because the only difference between you and a child is just how much information has gone onto the blank slate, right? So it has a dark side. And so the idea is the mind is a blank slate and experience writes on it. And the Romantics are basically the reverse of that. They say, no, it's not a matter of how information is impressed on me in science. So they invert it and say, no, what it is the world is a blank canvas upon which, and this is one of their terms, I express myself. I press myself out onto the world, express. So it's not a matter of like doing scientific taking in of data. It's about the artistic expression and meaning making. Now, this sounds beautiful, right? We sort of like this idea, except notice what that's saying. It's saying the world is actually a blank canvas, which means the world in and of itself is meaningless. It's unstructured. It imposes no demands on you as to what is true, what is good, and what is beautiful. There's a deep, dark side to that.
Is it kind of like that mountain can be conquered and then it has meaning? If I impose my will upon it, or metaphorically,
but see,
marketplace.
You're on the right track, I would say, but I would say the mountain at least has a structure that you have to conform yourself to. It makes demands from you. I'm talking about like a blank canvas that puts no limits on how you should express yourself, right? Now that's very liberating. And what they were doing is they were opposing how science put an emphasis on logic. Science says reason, but it's actually logic, right? For Locke, right? And they were doing something important. They were rescuing the faculty of imagination. That imagination is actually really important for leading a good human life.
The romantics were? Who?
The romantics are basically saying, like, there's a part of you that isn't a blank slate. They're right about this, by the way. There's a part of you, and this is what imagination points to, there's a part of you that is generative, that is actually trying to interpret the world, not just receive passively from it. So there's an element of knowledge making that is sense making, that is creative, that you participate in. But because they were reacting to an extreme on one side, the blank slate, they tended to go more and more extreme on the other side. And there's a dark side to that. And what happens is that movement, right, it loses steam at sort of a philosophical level. But by that time, kind of like how everybody knows Freud, even if they've never read Freud, Romanticism had percolated into the general culture. So it starts to go into a decadent phase. It's not being renewed by philosophical criticism, by artistic endeavor. It's decaying, and it shows up in popular culture. So we have one of the great evils of Western civilization. It's called the romantic comedy, which is something we watch that is an absolute bizarre, like anthropologically, when you look at, like, think about what a romantic comedy says. First of all, it says the cosmos cares about your erotic narrative. So it's like the world will bend itself to help you find the one, a term taken from Neoplatonism, by the way. So what it's telling you with that is, you know what used to be held by God and transcendent reality and philosophical schools and history and tradition? Your romantic partner is going to hold that for you. Imagine that. Just imagine that. That's the framing people go into this. You, pretending you're my romantic partner, you're going to do what God, philosophy, art, tradition do for people everywhere else. You. Just you. You're going to carry all of that.
I'm going to have to drink a couple Magic Minds each day to handle that burden.
You can't bear it, exactly. So this is, you can reliably do this. And there's data to back up what I'm going to say. Ask people, what's the most important thing in your life? And they'll say, my romantic relationship. And then you'll ask people, what has caused the most suffering in your life? My romantic relationships.
And that's a modern convention.
Yes, that's right. So, right, and notice what it does. It puts you into a way of thinking about eros, right? That is, I'm going to say this. I think it's evil, because what it does is it sets people up to suffer profoundly, because it gives them unrealistic expectations that can not be met. And it also diverts them. It deliberately diverts them from the evil arises when people pursue a lesser good in place of a greater good. It diverts them from exploring what is ultimate, what is the cultivation of wisdom, what is the cultivation of virtue. Beyond romantic relationships, I need friendship in a sacred sense. I need fellowship in a sacred sense. It diverts people from that. These are evil things, suffering. And then it's wrapped up in something that is saccharine and candy-coated, and you laugh, and it's fun. You see what I'm saying? And
and you feel like it all fit. It's symmetrical. The lovers met. It all worked out. And you see that a couple thousand times growing up, and that becomes the model.
That becomes the model. And so what you get convinced by is it's a decadent form of romanticism, that the most untutored, uneducated, impulsive stirrings of your imagination, the universe will fit itself to those and receive it like a blank canvas. And that is bullshit. You can be in the most fantastic relationship in your life, and you step into traffic, and the truck will still kill you. It doesn't swerve or stop because you found the person of your dreams. And so we carry this forward to the point where we describe our erotic relationships as romantic relationships, and we shrunk what Plato meant by eros down to sexual desire. Did that help?
It does immensely. It does, and it is so helpful in that. Could you? Well, I want to ask this as a question. Could you replace that romantic partner with that career goal is going to provide everything for you. That you build a company, you're going to have all of these answers that this tapestry used to provide is all going to come in that dawning of you are now partner in the law firm.
So that, right? So you have the two things. So what's going on with the scientific revolution, which is the discovery of technological imposition on the world. Technology allows us to impose so although we are taking in information like blank slate, as blank slates we are given the power of gods. Like, think about it, the power of gods. We can smash cities to the ground with bombs, one bomb, right? The power of gods to impose on the world. And then this is coordinated and mutually reinforced by the Protestant Reformation, which is telling you that working hard is the best sign that you're approved of by God. For you don't work to enjoy the fruits of your labor, you work to show that you're approved of by God. And this gets, again, sewn into our culture, so people somehow think that the intrinsic value of who and what they are is their economic productivity. And so what you do, but see how these things find each other, right? And you got to pay attention to that. What's one of the most common tropes in the romantic comedy? The workaholic man and the woman and the love that wakes him up from being a workaholic so that he can fall into the truth of the romantic relationship. Mm-hmm. And all you got are two evils that are conspiring together to keep people away from the Socratic, Platonic cultivation of wisdom and virtue.
Take us back to when you first you read Socrates through the conduit of Plato, and walk us through why that hit you, and then maybe even fast forward to then this bridge between, or this calling towards being a bridge between science and spirituality. And I do also, actually, as an addendum to that last question, I would love to know, because we could spend an hour just on that romanticism of it gone awry. What did we lose? Just because that's essentially what's hiding behind it.
We lost that reason and love are interdependent, not oppositional to each other. So that's the point I'd like to return to, and that is the great claim of Socrates and Plato. So I encounter Socrates. Socrates is, you're a Vedantist, so you know I'm using this word now not in the pejorative sense of North America, but in the ancient sense. Socrates is my guru. He's the sage that I've internalized. My whole life, I have aspired to be more and more like Socrates, and that is still the dominant drive. So that's how profoundly it hit me. And two things happened. One, I'd already been meditating, but I had to do it at night in the dark when everybody was asleep, because if I was meditating, I was opening myself up to demonic forces, that sort of stuff, right? And I was meditating in my bed, and I was just in first year university, because I still lived with my parents that year. And I had my first mystical experience. And it's hard to describe. Most of the mystical experiences I've had in my life are not very visionary, but this one was, and it's not an image, that's not the right word, but I had a mystical experience of the Platonic forms, which just had this huge, wow. So it was not only the figure of Socrates, there was this mystical experience that got integrated with it. But then, I literally moved to the second term of that course. And all of this talk about wisdom and meaning fell off the radar for academic philosophy. Philosophy, which means the love of wisdom, does not talk about wisdom, does not talk about virtue. They talk about ethics, but that's not the same thing. We now have overwhelming evidence, by the way, that getting really good at talking about ethical theory and making ethical arguments is not predictive of you being a virtuous person. So all of this stuff it fell off the radar. So I was suddenly like, what? So I came to value the skills they were teaching me, the skills of how do I reflect on science, how to reflect on culture, how to reflect on the nature of cognition, consciousness. I was appreciating that. So I didn't want to stop academic philosophy, but I was like, where do I go? And down the street from me literally down the street was a dojo teaching, and I didn't know it then, but I would call it now an ecology of practices. They were teaching an integrated system of Tai Chi Chuan, Vipassana meditation, and meta contemplation. And I turned to Asiatic philosophy, which is not cleanly distinguishable from religion, and cleanly distinguishable from personal cultivation and transformation. And that's where the hunger for the cultivation of wisdom and meaning was getting met.
So the light was switched on through to discover Socrates, maybe that first semester of courses. Then academia seemed to not be this fruit, at least not to be this continual well of what you were seeking. And then you found something else through movement and a dojo and martial arts.
Yeah.
And did that surprise you, especially for someone that is academically inclined? Did you feel like it shouldn't be in this dojo on the street?
Remember that I'd read Hermann Hesse, and I'd read Siddhartha by him. And so, and very shortly thereafter, I read the Ramayana and an abridged version of the Mahabharata. So I had a taste for Indian culture. And that was also in, like I said, Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. So it wasn't completely surprising to me. Now what happened is I went down that long arc of academic philosophy on one side and wisdom cultivation through Asiatic philosophy on the other side. After I got my MA in philosophy, I dropped out for a year, and I went through Jungian analysis because I just wanted to address the trauma and also open myself up to I can't just doing these practices. I've got to understand it from the inside. And I'd been introduced to Jung through the work of Robertson Davies. So I did all that, and then I came out, and then I heard that there was this new discipline, right? It was like the early 80s, cognitive science. So I started taking that up. And they were talking like Plato talked. They were mixing philosophy and psychology and development. And more it started to move into, and people were starting to talk in that discipline about wisdom, about meaning in life, about mystical experience. And it went more and more and more. And all of a sudden, the academic and the spiritual were coming back to each other. And so I get my PhD, where I got sort of into the main, what has turned out to be my main scientific work. And I have a friend and colleague at the University of Toronto, Evan Thompson, and they asked him to teach a course on Buddhism and cognitive science, and he couldn't do it. And they said, well, is there anybody else that might do it? And he said, well, John can do it. So they gave me that course, and what I started to do was I started to say, well, I can use cognitive science to talk about spirituality. And then I started to realize that the meaning crisis that I've been wrestling with, as I started to do research and I started to see what was catching the light in my students' eye, no, this was a general phenomena. And then I started to open it up, and that course grew.
Catching the algorithm on YouTube. I mean, it lit on fire. Just that title, it certainly evoked a click and
that's how it came about.
Attention for me.
I had a student, after I had been teaching that course for a while, and he had done the course and he came back to me. He said, my father is a professional editor and I am like a professional videographer and I have a crew for free. Let's film this and turn it into a YouTube series. And that's how Awakening from the Meaning Crisis began. And then I realized that, wow, this is touching a nerve. The argument I was making was catching in a way beyond an academic setting. And that's led to where I am now.
Well, let's jump into Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And if you could give us an overview on almost a synopsis of that first episode of what this problem really looks like from a scientific point of view, from the data, and certainly those first few minutes of episode 1 do it justice if you could give people an overview.
Sure. My friend, my dear friend and collaborator, there's Chris. He and I have been working together. So one part of what I'm going to talk about is due to work that I've done with Chris. We've developed what we call the symptomology of the meaning crisis. What are the symptoms of it? Almost like a disease, and how is it showing up in our culture? And then There's the cognitive science of, well, what do we mean when we talk about meaning in life? What is it we're actually talking about? What does it mean when, and you're right, that data, when the vast majority of British people, so it wasn't just the adolescents, by the way, declare that their lives are meaningless, when we know that meaninglessness is predictive of, so, like if you think your life is meaningless and you don't have that sense of connectedness or belonging, this is also the work by Kelly Allen and all other, you're in serious psychological, physiological, social, economic distress. You're in trouble. Professional. You're in deep trouble. Because how I start this series is our capacity for being involved with meaning is fundamental to the kind of beings we are. So what do you mean by that? Okay, well, let me
have to break it down for my simple Texan brain.
I wouldn't describe your brain as simple. Thank you. You say profound things that are provocative in very good ways.
Thank you.
I'm going to try doing sort of a quick, light version of something that's very, very, like, you can get, so I'm asking people to trust that, like, if you want to dig down into the rigorous science, it's there, and the publications are, and the presentations to conferences there. So I'm not going to try and present it at that level where I'm trying to convince people. I'm just going to present it. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Okay, because I don't want to presume on anybody. I'm not asking anybody to just carte blanche. Trust me. That what I'm saying is, trust me that if you want to see if this is well justified and well argued and well evidenced, it's there for you. Okay. So let's start with something that's really central to you, which is that you're an agent. Okay, so everything behaves. This table behaves. It generates behavior. Right? Now you're an agent, and your agency is actually, I'm going to try and argue, is really crucial to you. Right? You're an agent in that what you can do is you can determine the consequences of your behavior and alter your behavior to bring about the consequences that actually produce, protect, and promote your existence. Right? Now that sounds sort of trite and easy. The problem is if you stop there and you leap into sort of the world of common everyday experience, you miss the issue, the place where meaning in life is actually to be properly understood. So that capacity to adjust your behavior, it's going to evolve across time into what we call intelligence. Okay? Now your intelligence, all of your intelligence, is you're a general problem solver. What that means is, unlike this basically solves one problem, it carries liquids around. You can maybe turn it into a weapon, but it's a single problem solver. Now you can solve a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of domains. You can learn about the Napoleonic Wars. You can travel to Australia and learn about the country. You can take up tennis. You can learn how to swim. And so this is why people now are talking about artificial general intelligence. Up until now, the AI we had was very domain specific. You could get an AI that could perhaps beat you in a couple of related video games. And that was until very, very recently. But when we got the LLMs, like ChatGPT, you've got something that is solving problems in many domains. That's why it's called artificial general intelligence, right? So now, so there's two things that are in that ability to have general intelligence. One is you have to think about intelligence is your capacity for solving problems. And the things that make you generally intelligent are two sort of, they're meta problems. They're problems you have to solve whenever you're solving any of your problems. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, so try and think about this intuitively. How do you judge if something's more intelligent? Like pretend a non-human. You'll judge it generally by how deeply it can anticipate into the future.
So my favorite definition of wisdom within Vedanta, and some folks from the Venice Vedanta Club here, is the capacity to see the end in the beginning.
Right. So Michael Levin talks about the cognitive light cone. Right. How deeply into reality does your cognition let you reach? Okay. So the meta problem is I'm trying to anticipate and do you want to meet the tiger and react to the tiger, or do you want to avoid the tiger? Do you want to anticipate where the food is going to be, or just wander hoping to find it? So the more you can anticipate, the more adaptive you are. Okay? I'm almost there. Hang in with me. I know this is, oh, come on. I'll just keep going, right? So that's, now, as you do that, as you make the distance between your initial state and the goal you're trying to reach, as that goes bigger and bigger, you face the second meta problem. And this is the problem of zeroing in on the relevant information. So the problem is, as you sort of open up the possibilities you're going to consider, it expands. Now let me just give you a quick, concrete example of that. I'm going to use something that's actually very limited in time and space, very limited in complexity, a game of chess. How many of you understand that your life is more complex than a game of chess? I hope you do. Okay, good.
And a game of chess is one of the most complex games humans have ever come up with.
But so think about all the possible moves you could make in chess, okay? And if you calculate all the possible moves you could make and all the possible combinations of moves you could do in sequence of moves, you get what's called the problem space. All of the alternative possibilities that have to be considered. The number of those alternative pathways is greater than the number of atomic particles in the universe.
So no one can contemplate them all.
Even the best chess AI doesn't do that. That's, by the way, why we'll have the best chess AI, and then we can come up with a better chess AI that can beat the earlier chess AI. Because you can't search all the
never get there.
Okay, but here's what I need you to get. That's happening right in this room. The amount of information you can pay attention to and the combinations of how you could pay attention to is also combinatorially explosive like that. Now, how much information do you think you have in your long-term memory? How many combinations of that information do you think you have? Now, this is what you're doing. Out of all of that information out there, all of that information in here, all the possibilities available to you, you're zeroing in on the relevant information. You're getting the right information from memory, you're paying attention to the right information in the environment, and you're coming up with the right sequences of action that respond to it. Does that make sense? That's relevance realization. And this is the Zen koan at the center of this. You're intelligent, not because of how much information you take in. You're intelligent by how much information you can ignore, but do it well. Because what you have to do is ignore. How many of you were thinking about what color the back wall was? None of you. That's information readily available to you. I wonder if there's any correlation between the shadow patterns on that wall and the shadow patterns there. We could be checking that out. I wonder if there's a correlation between how many paper clips are in your kitchen and your tendency to stay up late at night. Okay, science can't do. So you can't check the alternatives to see if they're irrelevant. You have to ignore most of them. Does that make sense? So you have to put a frame around your cognition. Now,
my high school professor told me my other favorite definition of wisdom was knowing what's important.
Yes, knowing what to zero in on. Now, here's the thing. There is no chemical, physical, in the sense of physics, marker of what's important. There's, right? Now, there's two temptations. One is...
Do you mind saying that one more time?
There's no chemical, physical, mechanical marker of what's relevant. And things can be relevant 1 minute. My finger! Now it's not relevant again.
The shadows, the water, this conversation, the word that you're about to say, person in the back row, raising their hand, all of it could be relevant, might not be, but you're saying there's no physical signal that says, here's the stack order of what things are relevant.
Right. Okay, so there's two major consequences. One has to do with wisdom, and the other has to do with meaning in life. Okay, so now, the more I anticipate into the world, the worse, and I don't mean in a linear fashion, I mean in an exponential fashion. So the more you're anticipating, the worse the relevance realization problem becomes. So you have to solve these two problems together.
The worse is in the harder it becomes, or the worse results you get? Okay.
Both. The risk and the effort get more challenging. Okay, now, What does that mean? So the temptation might be to think, well, the relevance is in the thing and I just receive it. Locke, empiricism. That's wrong. Is this relevant? It might be, might not be. It's not in this thing. Oh, the romantics must be right. I give things their relevance. Oh, you do? Really? So you can just decide the tiger's not relevant and that's fine? Relevance isn't in the object. It's not in the subject. So this is what Gibson called an affordance. So for example, this is graspable, right? Now, is the graspability in the bottle? No, it can't be grasped by a fly. Is the graspability in my hand? No, I can't grasp Africa. The graspability is in the fittedness of my hand to the bottle. My hand conforms and can fit the bottle. Relevance isn't in the bottle. It isn't in my mind. The empiricists are wrong. The romantics are wrong. It's how I and the bottle fit to each other, connect to each other, belong together. Does that make sense? So, two B's to carry from, right? So, two things to carry from this. One is that belongingness. Okay, so please remember that. But what's the risk? Let's go back to the chess analogy. You can't search all of the alternatives. So what you'll do is you'll do what's called a heuristic. You'll try and pre-specify where you'll focus your attention. So one way to increase the chance of winning at chess is to focus on controlling the center board. The last game of chess I played, don't play chess with a cognitive scientist, right? I realized, oh, that's what this person's doing. They're trying to control the center board. I'll pretend that I care about the center board and I'll build a peripheral attack. And it'll look like I'm losing until 2 moves away when I suddenly come down the periphery and I checkmate them, which is what I did. Because the thing about pre-specifying is it's also prejudging, which is what a prejudice is. So the very thing that's making us adaptive necessarily makes us perpetually prone to self-deception. We're making a fundamental misframing of reality and judging what is to be important or relevant that actually turns out to not be important or relevant to solving our problems.
So a surfing analogy might be your prejudgment that I do not want to get hurt locks you up as you're trying to take a wave. And that prejudgment, no matter what, I just want to make sure I do not get hurt. That tension locks you up. Before you can really adapt to the scenario, before you are preserving your life and limb at maximal cost that then causes that tension that then causes you to wipe out massively, get thrown off your board because you can't adapt to this new information that you need to turn right.
Yeah, exactly. But you do that all, there's easy cognitive examples. So you ask people, what's the gray stuff that comes off fire? Well, it's smoke. And what kind of tree grows from an acorn? An oak. And what is this? So stroke. What's this? Choke. What do you call the white of an egg? And they'll say yolk. No, it's the white of the egg. But they hear oak, oak, oak. Oh, that's the relevant thing. And then they fall into the pattern. Or there's a pond of water. There's a lily pad on it. Every day, the number of lily pads doubles. On day 20, the pond is filled. On what day was it half filled with lily pads? People, they'll say, oh, day 10. It's day 19. It's day 19. Day 19, it was half full. Right? So, but do you see what happens? People, they key into the wrong information. And that's, who cares about lily pads and yolks? But this will happen to you. Oh my gosh. I thought she was angry. She's actually afraid. I've misframed this whole situation. I was paying attention to the wrong things. I put them in the wrong frame. I was fitting myself incorrectly to this situation. I wasn't finding the true affordances of connectedness. I was disconnected from reality. Self-deception is not lying to yourself. You can't lie to yourself. You can't. But what you can do with not properly educating your attention and your cognition is you can disconnect yourself from reality. So this is like the first noble truth of Buddhism. The very thing that is trying to connect you to reality, that adaptive fittedness, is also making you perpetually susceptible to self-deception and self-destruction. So what you need, you have to address those two together. I can't come in and wipe out your adaptive processes. Well, what I'll do is I'll remove that framing thing from, well, James is dead because he tries to get up out of the chair and he tries to consider all the possibilities, and this is the last thing he does. I can't take that away from you, right? We were talking about this earlier. Maybe we could talk about it, like the temporal discounting. Why people, you procrastinate because it's actually, you're using very adaptive machinery, right? So you can't make that go away, but you can't just leave yourself vulnerable to all this self-deception. So you have to come up with this very powerful way of intervening that doesn't try to kill, think about the middle path, doesn't try and kill the adaptive processes, but it tries to compensate for them so that you can ameliorate the self-deception and enhance the connectedness. Across cultures, across history, people have figured out ecologies of practices, living systems of practice for doing that. That's called the cultivation of wisdom. Wisdom isn't about getting arcane knowledge. Wisdom is about, do you have reliable practices, reliable communities supporting those practices, reliable cultural frameworks supporting those communities that allow people to reliably ameliorate self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior, foolishness, and cultivate enhanced connectedness, flourishing. That's wisdom. That's the cultivation of wisdom.
To avoid self-sabotage.
So, to avoid self-sabotage, but also sabotage of others, because your cognition is never isolated. Your cognition is all... Did you invent English? I didn't invent it.
I didn't. I almost took credit for it.
Yeah.
But then I figured people would Google it and it'd be a fraud, so no, I didn't.
We are always, and this is the cognitive science, we are always doing our problem solving in concert with, through, and by means of other people. So this kind of thing we're talking about, and this is the great Socratic insight, right? This kind of proclivity for self-deception, for the severing of the connectedness that we hunger for, and I'll talk about that in a sec, right? We have to do that. So let's go back to the word, philia, Sophia. Sophia is wisdom. What's philia? Philia means fellowship. We have to do that in fellowship together. It's a shared love. We have to do it collectively, because the best person for correcting my self-deception is you. The best person for correcting your self-deception is me.
This is the meat of the conversation, which is avoiding that self-sabotage and avoiding that meaninglessness doom loop. And this gets into one of the, I hate to use the word prescription, but one of the timeless concepts, which is community.
Yes.
And specifically, take it to the Sanskrit word, one of the oldest philosophical concepts in history, satsang or sangha.
Yep.
Take it to Christianity and fellowship. And
the ecclesia, which means the gathering, the church.
The church body. So walk us through how we correct ourselves from ending up in this doom loop of meaninglessness, of all of the lives, all of the parts of our life that can just go up in flames. What are the corrective, self-corrective, the habits that we could take on to correct this and avoid it?
Okay, so just quickly, that connectedness that's sort of seems mundane, like with the bottle, but if you do death reflection with people, which is imagine that you're dying and you have your loved ones around you, what matters to you at this point? People don't say their wealth, they don't say their status, they don't say their accomplishment, they say their connectedness to their relationships, to people, sometimes to places, sometimes to projects, but almost always it's people or deeper aspects of reality. That's the connectedness I'm talking about. When you do research on meaning in life, so first of all, our culture is telling you that meaning in life is purpose. We treat it as a synonym. So what you're doing is working towards something. That's false. Purpose is only one of 4 components of meaning in life, right? And it's not the most important. That's the Protestant shadow in how we understand meaning in life. We understand meaning in life is to work hard towards a goal. That's one of the 4 components. It's important, but it's not the only one, and it's not the most important one. The next one is coherence. Your experience can't be fundamentally absurd. It has to make sense to you. And things make sense to you, not just from the world and not just from you, but how you're properly connected to them. I was explaining that. Significance. How real is it? You care. Romantic relationships. I do this with my class regularly. How many of you are in satisfying romantic relationships? So we get those people. Okay, now I'm only addressing you. How many of those people want to know if your partner's cheating on you, even though that would mean that the certain destruction of the relationship? 98% of the people put up their hands. And I say to them, why do you want to know this information if it's going to destroy their relationship? And here's my students, they're all hard-bitten with postmodernism and cynicism, and they, without thinking, say, because it wouldn't be real. Because we actually care. We find being connected to reality intrinsically valuable to us. So there's that. And then the third, the last one, after purpose and reality, realness, significance, and coherence, intelligibility, the final one, the most important one, is mattering. How connected are you to things? So people use the metaphor, I need to be connected to something greater than myself. Now, that's a metaphor, because if I chain you to a mountain, you don't go, look, I'm connected to something bigger than myself. Right? It's obviously a metaphor. Now, a very good philosopher, Susan Wolf, basically looked at this. What are people meaning by the metaphor, and there's a lot of convergence from psychology. So here's how I could put it to you. So now we're back to the practicality I circled around. First of all, ask yourself these 2 questions. What do you want to exist even if you don't? How much of a difference do you make to it right now? If you don't have an answer to the first one, you're in trouble. You're in deep trouble. If you don't have an answer to the second one, I predict you're a searcher. You're searching. You've got a sense that you need to be connected to something that has a reality and an importance that is independent of your egocentric existence, but you don't know how to properly connect to it. If you got an answer to both of those, and it's not just a connection to yourself, but a connection to other people and a connection to reality, then you're on the path, I would argue. You're on the path.
The three of the biggest questions that I have appreciated from your work that really gets into this self-reflection, this territory where it goes from academic concepts, conversations with big words to, oh shit, personal reflection, are these 3 questions. One is, you said, I believe it's Aristotle that said, the cultivation of one's character is the most important thing we do.
Yes.
And then you followed it up by saying, how much time each month, each day, or each month, each week, each day do you spend cultivating your character? The most important thing we do you spend any time cultivating it? And then the other rhetorical question or self-reflective question you just touched on is, what would you want to exist even if you didn't?
And how much of a difference do you make to it?
Which is its own big reflective question. Yeah. And then, what are you doing right now to impact that thing that you want to exist even if you don't? And these 3 questions, I would encourage people to write these down, because these can be exploratory questions for the next several weeks, months, years, in finding that mooring, that anchoring towards meaning, or also excavating why we might feel untethered in a disorienting sense, as if, well, cultivating my character, I've never heard anyone friggin' talk about cultivating character. I read that one book 8 months ago. That was amazing. But not on a daily basis, a cultivation. Or I don't know what would exist, what is greater than myself, that would exist, that I would want to exist even if I didn't. And then certainly I'm not spending time impacting that. And even if you have that answer of something that I want to exist, even if I didn't, it's a very sobering question of how much time do you spend each day impacting it.
And it is, and you have, and I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, but you have to do this compassionately. And I don't mean that in a fatuous compassion. I mean that, right? you have to do it with full understanding that human beings have exigent demands on them. People have to work. They have to support their children. Like, meaning in life is not the only thing that matters to a good life, right? But it is important. Like, so you have, like, you're not doing it. But I would say I fell into this sin, and that's, even though I'm not a Christian, that's the word I would use for this, of thinking that people were somehow failing, right? Or I should be making them feel guilty because they came up short on that answer. First of all, I don't know people's lives, right? So, right, it's got to be this much more delicate question, right? How much space can people devote to this question beyond, above, and so there's large parts of the earth where people are just trying to survive, right? And like like the Gospels say, don't preach the gospel when somebody needs a coat, like right. And so you have to take that into consideration. But then once you do, right, you have to also be compassionate on the other side, because, well, I'll ask my students this: where do you go for information? They hold up their cell phone. I'll say, where do you go for knowledge? And this is like the T.S. Eliot quote, right? Where do you go for knowledge? And they'll say, well, the university, science. And then I'll say, well, where do you go for wisdom? And they have no answer. And they get anxious about it because they know they should probably have an answer.
Did we culturally have an answer before?
Of course we did. We lost a culture of wisdom culture. Look, knowledge and wisdom address different things. First of all, we thought we could, part of the claim of the Enlightenment is we could reduce pursuing wisdom into pursuing knowledge. This is the T.S. Eliot. Where's all the wisdom we have lost in the knowledge? Where's all the knowledge we've lost in the information? He's actually tracing out a process of decadence, of degradation. We thought, oh no, we don't need, this is the great Cartesian proposal. We don't need the monasteries. We had monasteries in the West. The Protestant Reformation shuts them down. We don't need monasteries. We don't need places that are dedicated to overcoming foolishness. We just need to overcome ignorance. So we just need a universal method for doing that. We don't have to transform ourselves and our identities. We just have to come up with the universal calculus, as Leibniz said. And that's, of course, got us where we are. So we reduced wisdom to knowledge, and then we reduced all the kinds of knowing to the one kind of knowing, propositional knowing. And then that very quickly devolves into the gathering of information. And so there's this, we had wisdom cultivation traditions. We had a mystical tradition. We had an institution. We had these three institutions that interlocked together in a self-correcting fashion. We had a knowledge institution, the university. We had a wisdom institution, the monastery. And then we had a life institution, a way of bringing the wisdom and knowledge to bear on people's life, and also for people's lives to feed into the wisdom institution and the knowledge institution. That was the church. We had the monastery, the church, and the university. And what we did is we shut down the monasteries. We basically have tried to replace the church with science, and then the state. And by the way, for good reason. I'm not saying we should go back to a theocracy. I'm not nostalgic. I want to go back to the wonderful days of the Middle Ages. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I say put on my tombstone, neither utopia nor nostalgia. I don't want to go back, and I don't believe there's a utopic future that we can bring about in a Promethean revolution or something like that. But we lost the wisdom institution. The knowledge institution got bound to the state. The universities are now tethered to the state, and then the state has tethered itself to the market. So we have gone through this degradation. We've lost wisdom cultivation. We reduced knowledge, right, significantly to what is computable knowledge, which then becomes information processing, which then gives us what we are right now. So we've lost the institutions, we've lost the culture, and we've degraded reason into mere logical calculation. See, one of the things we lost when we lost the Platonic is we lost the idea that love and reason are intertwined together. And that's what you need when you're cultivating wisdom. It's the love of wisdom. You have to love it. It's right, because it involves, look, this is a great insight from the Republic by Plato. The two things that reliably predict people saying, I want to keep living this life, regardless of how, like, meaning in life, to say that your life, you have meaning in life means that I think this life is worth living, even though it's filled with all of my faults, all of my foolishness, all of my failings, all the faults, foolishness, failings of other people, all the frustrations, all the futilities. Like, life is like wow, right? And yet, meaning in life is, I want to keep, it's worth living because, right, of this meaning in life.
Because I'm connected to something bigger than myself that I want to impact.
Right. And so what are the things that are predictive of that, right? Two things is, how much peace of mind do you have? Which is not the same thing as how sort of subjectively good do you feel? It's like, how much are parts of your psyche as fully alive as they can be without trespassing on the life of each other? So how much is my mind alive? I'm just going to use these anatomical metaphors. How much is my mind alive while affording the most my heart can be alive and the most that my energy can be alive, and vice versa? How much mutual affording life? Because I can live from here that crushes this and this. I can live from here. This is Plato's great insight that crushes this. So inner peace is inner justice. That was his metaphor. What's the most just relationship between those? And then what we already talked about, how connected is that sense of inner justice, peace, to reality? Do I get it through deluding myself, or do I get it by being connected to reality? And what Plato realized, this is the great thing, and this will get me back to love, right, is when I'm getting this inner alignment, I'm actually reducing the machinery of self-deception. Because one of the things that screws up how I pay attention is when these things have a chaotic relationship to each other. The more aligned they are, and you know this, you know those moments where you're aligned and you can see clearly into the situation. Contrast them to the moments where you're all like,
you almost feel like the outcome is, you already know what's about to happen.
Yes.
You're so aligned.
So what Plato says is, okay, so you get aligned, and that satisfies this one meta desire. I've got peace. Again, not vapid, oh, I feel good. Peace, justice, peace. It's like the Hebrew word shalom, right? But you also see more deeply into reality. Now I'm satisfying that desire for being connected to reality. But it doesn't stop that way, because they're fitting to each other. As I see more deeply into reality, you know what I get better at doing? Seeing more deeply into reality. And now I can turn that on myself and see more deeply into the internal reality and bring about an even better inner justice peace. And now I get even freer from self-delusion, so I can see more deeply through illusion into reality. And do you see how these now feed on each other? And they each
like a left foot, right foot,
yes,
left foot, right foot.
And they're going like this. This is anagage. This is the ascent out of the cave, right? And what this is, right, is this is the mutually accelerating satisfaction of these two meta desires. What could be a better life? Now think about that. When have you experienced something that gets aligned in you and you see more deeply, and then that reverberates back into you? Well, we know this from the research. If I get two people and they start to do mutually accelerating disclosure, it sounds really almost pornographic, right? But like you say, you open up to me and you're vulnerable, and I respond in kind by opening up and I let you peek a little bit through the appearance, the persona, into the person, and you see a little bit more, and then you respond and then we do this mutually accelerating disclosure. That's the same reciprocal opening. Do you see that? And the other person allows you to see more deeply into yourself, right? And then you can see more deeply into them, and you do this. That's how you get people to fall in love with each other. Not just romantic love, not just romantic love, but friendship love, all the loves. Eros, philia, agape.
We're locked right now. Yeah. I'm feeling it right now.
Now, do you see what this
could be the magic mind, but it also could be the conversation we're having.
But do you see what's happening? I'm simultaneously becoming more rational, not monologically on my own, calculating the universe and doing logic. By the way, that's doomed to fail, because logic works algorithmically. If I were to use logic, you know what I have to do? I have to check all the information. That's cognitive suicide. Spock and
Being
data are...
a startup investor, the most analytical minds I worry about the most.
Yes.
When they enter the combinatorially explosive world of starting a company, where you're basically inventing a game and trying to be the best in the world at it at the same time. You're not in that, and you're not in an analysis of someone else's game or well-established rules. That analytical framework, it's why artists often make amazing founders, artistically leaning individuals, because they're so used to navigating abstraction.
That's excellent, thank you. So notice what's happening here. We're dialogically, that's Socrates. Socrates does everything dialogically. You know, the Socratic method, question.
Do you mind explaining it to me? And we're about to get to Q&A for folks too, but dialogical, what is...
So monological is I'm playing on this word. I mean both. All I'm thinking about is logic, and that's algorithmic, and that gets you into that problem you just put your finger on so well, right? And also monologue, doing it on my own. So let's move off being logical, trying to pursue certainty. That's what Descartes told us to do, and we know the 20th century has been the discovery that certainty is not something we can pursue. We can't pursue it computationally. We can't do it in physics. We can't do it in logic. Gödel's Gödel's theorem, right? Mm-hmm. No free lunch theorem, bias variance trade-off. We've learned that's an impossible dream, not in the great sense, right, of Don Quixote, but in the, no, stop that.
Stark contrast from 100 years ago, feeling like it's right around the corner.
That's right. And so let's put that aside. So dialogical means that we are not just dialoguing, where I'm giving you some information, you're giving me back, but we're doing that mutually accelerating disclosure. We're doing what's called reciprocal opening. You're opening and it's affording, and we're doing...
Which is my favorite definition of friendship that you described once, was mutual accelerating disclosure.
Yes.
Never heard anyone define friendship before, and much less such a great definition. In Vedanta, they'll say often that reflection is 100,000 times more powerful than listening. We all know in one ear, out the other, but reflecting is so much more powerful than an audiobook, a TED Talk. We're like, wow, that was amazing. You forget it the next day.
Yes.
But the reflection of not only writing it down, thinking about if there are any parts of this conversation that speak to you, it basically is a massive disservice to be like, that was a cool evening. If there's one thing that speaks to you, resonates, 2 or 3, reflect on them for perhaps days, if not weeks, because the reflection is 100,000 times more powerful. But also within Vedanta, which we talked about today, the stack order of reflection, yes, quiet, stillness, isolation, that can be reflection. Writing, even better form of reflection. The highest form of reflection is in communities, actually discussion, which is so different than anything in the Western world that we think of as reflection. We rarely equate that to discussion. We think it's actually anathema to discussion.
So what we
dialogical process.
And what we do is we have a monological model of discussion. I transmit to you, and then you transmit to me, and then we negotiate what we may agree on. So but that's not like think about if you try to run any kind of love relationship that way. If you make it transactional in that way, any good therapist will tell you, if your relationship is becoming transactional, the relationship is dead. Because the relationship is not about transaction, it's about meaning in life. It's about, right? You and Socrates said this, the best reflection I have is in your eyes. That is how I can best see myself. Yeah, and he punned on the, like you can see yourself in the person's pupil, but I see myself, and this is what the Cog-Sci is showing. You take standard reasoning tasks that people reliably fail on when they do it as an individual, you replace it with 4 people who are allowed to talk this way to each other, and the success rate will go from like 10% to 82% reliably. We are meant to work together dialogically.
From unsuccessful to successful.
Totally. So,
do you mind saying that one more time?
Which?
The process in which to take it from 10% to 82%.
So you take any kind of standard task like the Wason selection task that people rely, and these are highly intelligent, highly educated people, they reliably fail on the task. 10% is the success rate. You do the exact same experiment with 4 people that are allowed to talk to each other, but not just monologically. I think this, you think that. Not adversarially, but in this reciprocal opening fashion, and you will replace the success rate will go from 10% to like 82%.
So solving a puzzle in a group dynamic where there is trust and perhaps mutually accelerating disclosure can result in success that the individual, the monological individual, cannot achieve.
That's right. Now, there are problems with groups too, but they're not, there's no panacea, but there's an important resource there. So have you ever been in one of those conversations that takes on a life of its own?
This one right here. I've thrown away all the questions that I had just to follow the line of thought in this conversation.
So you're doing what Socrates became a master in, and what he recommended. Okay, the word for that is logos. It's where we get the word logic from, but it's also where we get like ology and anthropology or psychology. It means the study of, it means logic, but it also means reason. It means the structural, functional organization of something, right? It's gathering things together so they come to belong together such that we can be accountable to them and we can get an account of them. This, right? And so that's the logos. That's where dialogos, dialogue, the word comes from. When that catches and it takes on a life of its own, Socrates said, I want to follow that, like you follow the wind, like you follow spirit. I follow that wherever it goes. My following is, I'm not trying to beat you in an argument. I'm not a lover of victory. I'm a lover of wisdom.
Philosophia versus Philonekia.
Right, and so you're following the logos. Because when you're in those conversations, both people get to a place they couldn't have gotten to on their own, and they know it. And they also touch the logos, and they touch something that's deeper. And what we've done is with the help of Chris and with my help of my friend Guy Senstock is here, right? We've created a whole set, an ecology of practices for helping people get into this Socratic way. So we call it dialogos because it's not simple dialogue. It's doing this generation of philia so that something emerges that we both start to follow that is orienting us towards the love of wisdom. That's what dialogos is. That's the Socratic. Now, I want to say one thing. Do you see how that is simultaneously the reciprocal opening of love, but it is also the overcoming of self-delusion and disconnectedness. It is the deepest kind of rationality and the deepest kind of love and the deepest kind of communing that are possible for a human being. And we have separated those into the political, right, and the emotional and the rational. And we've created all these antagonistic relationships when they are actually, all of the science, all of the philosophical history, all of the cross-cultural analysis says, no, those are actually deeply interwoven together. Another way of understanding the meaning crisis is if we have fragmented them, and so we are perpetually fragmented within ourselves and between ourselves.
We have opposed the parts that should stand together in alignment,
That's
or at
right.
least most optimally stand together in alignment.
Yes, exactly.
Is that the attraction to the Socratic model where Socrates comes along and you have the pre-Socratic philosophers of natural philosophers, the scientists? It's like, no, the modern day beaker holders. And then you have the sophists, the poets, the artists. Rhetoric. And he comes along and he says, no, both need to exist, right. And not because those two schools vehemently opposed each other.
So yeah, Socrates, he actually...
Do you feel like that's an embodiment of what you're doing today of science and art, of
totally.
Love and reason, as you mentioned?
So Socrates cultivated a rationality of care. So, I mean, everybody knows that Socrates...
Rationality of care, that's a great phrase.
You know how you fundamentally differ from a computer? Remember what I was talking about earlier? Computers don't care about the information that they're processing. They don't care if it's true or false. They don't care if it's good or evil. They don't care if it's beautiful or ugly. Because the reason why you care is because you are what the technical term in cognitive science is, you're an autopoietic thing. You are the kind of entity that is constantly making itself, constantly taking care of itself. So you have to find some information relevant to you. You care about this because it ultimately helps you take care of yourself physically, psychologically, socially, spiritually. You know how to care. If I could summarize what you need to do to live well is you have to love wisely. Socrates would come into the marketplace and say, look at all the things I don't need. Mm-hmm. So he knew that he didn't know, that's very famous, but he also knew things. He knew that the unexamined life is not worth living, and he died for that. He died for that. They told him you can continue to live as long as you stop doing your Socratic thing. And he said, no, I'd rather die because the unexamined life is not worth living.
And there was also this intuition that there was more than just this body. At least it seems when his response to Credo, when Credo said, what should we do with your body after you're dead? And he said, or what should we do with you after you're dead? And he said, do what you like, but first you've got to catch me.
Yes. So Plato is very coy about life after death. Mm-hmm. So in the Apology, Socrates says, I don't know what happens, and I don't know if it's worse or better. In the Credo, he says what he said. In the Phaedo, he makes arguments for immortality, but Plato says, he has Socrates say, but these are myths, so I don't take them literally. So his relationship to it is, but he also importantly says, all of philosophy is a preparation for death. Mm. And that's like, what would matter to you when you're dying?
Which is an underscoring of, even in a conversation, philosophia, love of wisdom, versus I feel like our entire culture is based on philonikeia, of victory, love of victory, to where it's this conversation is
This is why we're losing democracy. This is why we're losing democracy.
And I read something, I read 2 weeks ago that Republicans would trust China more
than Democrats. And vice versa.
And this isn't a statement on China or geopolitical viewpoints, other than to say they will trust people that have absolutely no ties to a national goal over people 10 feet away that have a different set of views.
Democracy, which is also something Socrates and Plato wrestled with.
That's philonikeia, yeah.
What it's become that, but it wasn't, right? Democracy has this in it as its potential. It has in it the recognition that there is a collective intelligence. Long before the internet networked computers together to release the power of distributed computation, culture networked brains together to release the power of distributed cognition. Mm. Think about all the problems that are being solved so that we can be here doing this. Okay, but that's the one. Okay, that we're talking about. We are designed by evolution to work dialogically, not monologically. And then the second is the ongoing true virtue of humility. I forever will need self-correction, and my best opportunity to overcome my bias is to realize that you have a different bias than I do, so you can see my bias just like I can see yours. You know how you can see your friend's mistakes so easily, and yet you can't, like, oh, look at the silly romantic thing he's doing again. And then you do your thing, your 8th time, right? Oh, I'm doing it again, after it's finally, screwed up, mm-hmm. Right? We are right? So democracy is, okay, what we need to do is so in biology, there's a notion called opponent processing. Opponent processing is when you have two systems that have complementary biases, and so they're working in opposite directions, but they're bound together, and that gives you an adaptive. Let me give you a quick example. You have an autonomic, self-lawing, self-governing nervous system. It is what is constantly calibrating your level of arousal, right? So you have the sympathetic nervous system that is biased to interpreting as much as it can as a threat or opportunity and juicing you up. Mm-hmm. Then you have a parasympathetic system that is biased to try and interpret as much of reality as this is a safe, stable, calm, not much is going on, I can calm down and go to sleep. And you need both. And you have to be able to go from extremes. You have to be able to get really, really calm so you can go to sleep. You have to be able to get really, really excited if there's a tiger. And the answer isn't to be middling like a Canadian all day long. Well, there's a tiger, right? You have to be able to do this. Does that make sense? And what you do is you have these two systems. They have opposing biases, and they're locked together. They're pulling and pushing on each other. So you're constantly redesigning on the fly your level of arousal. And that's just one example. From the very cellular level up to the social level, biology generates opponent processing to solve problems of fittedness to the environment. Democracy was, let's tap into the power of distributed cognition and let's run opponent processing. And what we did is we removed the dialogical, we make it all about the monologue, and we turn the opponent processing into adversarial processing, when the goal is not to learn from the other person, be corrected by them, but destroy them because they are evil, because then I can silence them, and then my monologue will go on forever and ever and ever.
And that's not just a macro observation on democracy. That's such a great articulation of what we do in our own personal lives.
Of course.
Where we say, this mofo, I do not get along with it. I do not like their point of view. That coworker and I don't get along. And you bicker. And you isolate from anyone that, I do this all the time, where I find myself being like, I just don't like the energy. I'm going to isolate myself from anyone that is in a way going to correct or transform. So, and you talk about this with information. This is kind of an offshoot of the printing press.
Yeah.
Information is everywhere, especially 500 years later in our pockets. More information in our pockets than the President of the United States had 20 years ago. And more information being printed.
More calculating power. You have more power on one of your apps on your phone than all of NASA had at its disposal for the Apollo missions.
And so we have this informational power.
Not your phone, one of the apps on your phone.
Yeah, that's with our finger.
Yes.
Not a team of 150 scientists.
Men like gods.
So that we have this information, but one of the things that and by the way, I just want to underscore that rationality of care.
Well, I want to come back to that.
That's such a beautiful articulation of what is missing. So I love the church that we go to each Sunday now, Vintage here in LA. And there's a cultivation of this, but this was not my childhood experience growing up in the church that I went to, where it was care or else you burn in hell.
Yeah,
there was no rationality to it.
No.
There was no reason to it. It was just do this or else. And on the flip side was the most hedonistic promise you could ever imagine and if you do it,
you get to party forever.
You get everything. You get to party forever.
Yeah, you have metaphysical fire insurance, and then once you've got that in your pocket, you get to party forever.
There was no rationality for care. Care for your neighbor because of the rationality, of cultivation of rationality. Care for your neighbor for your own selfish hedonistic reasons. Or a hedonistic, selfish desire, not a rationality.
Socrates would be the last person you would want in such a heaven, because he'd be going, yeah, but you still have to cultivate your character. The purpose of but notice how nihilistic that is. And this is the Nietzschean critique. The purpose of this life is just to get me to that world. There's the two worlds again, which means this world has no value in it. No intrinsic value. It's only instrumentally value. And then if you come to think that supernatural world is probably not there, it's probably absurd, you're left with, well, there's just this world, and it only has an instrumental value, and I guess only people have an instrumental value, and I guess I only have an instrumental value. We're all just tools to manipulate and control each other. But let's get back to the rationality of care, because I didn't get to answer the question. Socrates rejected the sophist. The sophists knew how to make things relevant to people, catchy, but they divorced it from a concern for the truth.
Modern day marketers.
Modern day marketers. And this is bullshit in the technical sense. See, the liar...
And that's not even derogatory. This is an immense amount of intelligence and brilliance goes into this very thing.
Yeah, this is Frankfurt's idea. So the liar depends on you caring about the truth to manipulate your behavior. They try to convince you that something that's true is not, because they know that if you care about the truth, that will affect your behavior. The bullshit artist is trying to get you to not care about if something is true or not. You mentioned marketing. An advertisement, right? One of my examples of this is, right, you see this advertisement, all these really gorgeous people, and they're so healthy, and they're happy, and they're obviously all just sexually attractive, but it's all seemed to be going really well. And at the center of it is the alcohol they're drinking in a bar, and everybody, go into a bar. It's not like that. Okay,
dude, they're like modern day opium dens.
Right.
When you really go into a real just dive bar.
And here's the thing, you know that a bar is not like that, and they know that you know, and they know you're laughing. I know it's not like that, but they've got you, because what they've got you in the mind frame is, I don't care if it's true or not, because I know it's not true. But what happens is you find the alcohol salient. It catches your attention. And they do it a few times. So now you go into the store and your eyes are wandering, and guess which bottle happens to jump off the shelves as being more salient? Oh, that one. And you buy it.
Salient being more noticeable.
More noticeable, it catches your attention. right? And the thing about you is you can't lie to yourself. But notice, like, I won't do it, but if I was to suddenly yell, you would orient on me, right? Because things can be salient and can grab your attention, but you can also make things salient by directing your attention. Your left big toe, now it's salient to you. You're aware of it, you're paying attention to it. So you can direct your attention to make something salient that then catches your attention, so you're more likely to direct your, and then you do this, and you narrow down. That's the sophists. They're bullshit artists. And he said, oh, I don't want that. And then he has the natural scientists who are coming up with scientific explanations, but he said, yes, but how does that science help me become a good person? How does it help me become, how does all this knowledge help me become wiser? And they have no answer. So they have truth, but it's not transformatively relevant. And the sophists have relevance, but it's disconnected from the truth. And Socrates said, you know what we need? We need people to be pursuing transformatively relevant truths. They have to develop a rationality of care, what they love, what they care about.
And that's not through information. We'll get to Q&A now, but that's not through information. And to continue that previous thought, that is really hopefully an accurate synopsis of your observation, that today, the way we consume a book is for information.
Not transformation.
It's in the difference being
but that's
information.
Descartes.
Information. Okay, Descartes. The information is, let me feed the ideas I already have. Let me confirm the ideas I already have. Yes, this confirms it. That's not relevant to me. Versus 2,000 years ago, man, this doesn't make sense. I need to sit with it.
Okay, but 2,000 years ago, you're not reading it alone. First of all, you're reading aloud. Reading silently is a more recent invention. You're reading aloud, and you're almost always reading with other people. Remember, books are rare. So you're doing Lectio Divina. You're reading in a group, and you're not reading just to take in the information. You're reading, and everybody is sometimes chanting the text, and you're resonating with it, and you're doing this dialogical practice, because you have the understanding, the Platonic Christian understanding, that some truths are only accessible to us if we undergo transformation. As the child is to the adult is to the sage. There are things you can't know as a child. You have to transform into an adult before certain parts of reality become accessible to you. That's why maturity is a virtue. But here's the idea: nobody's maturity is done, and it's not just getting more. An adult isn't just more child, right? It's a transformation. There are truths. Reality discloses itself to you. There are not all truths. There are truths that are only disclosable to you by undergoing transformation. But when you shut down the wisdom institutions, you shut down that kind of information. And now you get only information that is accessible through a universal method. We're back in the time of Socrates. We either get the bullshit from the marketing world, or we get science that gives us all these truths that tell us nothing about how we can find meaning, how to cultivate. Look, we have scientific explanations of everything except how we make meaning, how we care about the truth, so we can do science. Science doesn't have a home. The activity of science, the being of a scientist, has no home within the scientific worldview. We are homeless in the scientific worldview. So we're like Socrates. We either have the bullshit of the modern day sophists, or we have the natural scientists who give us all these truths, and they are great truths. I'm a scientist. I love science. But they do not create a world to which I can belong and within which I can cultivate the love of wisdom. Look, rationality, rationing, ratio. It is about properly proportioning your caring about something. That's what it ultimately means, and that is also what love is.
Where can people cultivate this wisdom? In the Vervaeke Foundation comes to mind that you and a handful of colleagues have started, just as a quick plug for people that want to go from this conversation and want to learn more.
If you want to do the lecture series, there's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which is about the meaning crisis. There's After Socrates, which is not just lectures. It's also, I demonstrate practices, I give points of discussion. There's a pedagogy of like cultivating virtue along with following the lectures. So if you're interested in this Socratic Neoplatonic proposal and reconnecting to, the spiritual backbone of the West, that's there for you too, After Socrates. If you're interested in the cognitive science, I have a cognitive science show on the nature of consciousness. I do it dialogically with other people. If you're interested in taking up this, we have the Vervaeke Foundation, and the executive director is here, Christopher Mastropietro of the Vervaeke Foundation. And one of the great things for me is, unless you're insane or evil, you want things to grow beyond your grasp, right? And the Vervaeke Foundation is growing my work beyond my grasp, and thereby helping to keep me in a virtuous relationship with all of this, while also bringing in that distributed cognition and taking all of this and turning it into, we have a thing called Awakening to Meaning, which is a platform you can go on where you can do drop-in practices, you can take courses, you can take introductory courses, advanced courses, you can get into connections to, we have partnerships with people who teach courses. If you want to start cultivating, if you want to awaken to meaning, right, and you want to start to cultivate wisdom, you can go there. A lot of this is offered for free. We can't offer everything for free because we have to be able to sustain the foundation. But we are, and I only take a small all of the online income that's generated beyond what I do as a professor, right? All of that, I only take a small fraction of that for personal income because I have to give up other opportunities.
I hope you take more over time so that you don't have all of the 50 hours of responsibilities at University of Toronto, and you can devote to kind of a global audience.
Well,
but I get what you're saying as well.
Because the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. You have to be really careful around money. You have to be really careful around people giving you attention, right? You have to be really careful about moderating between getting caught up in pronouncing like I'm doing here, but actually keeping a deep connection to doing the science, because science is a big distributed cognition self-correction machine. That's what it does, right? That's what it's like. Science and democracy are supposed to be the two things that support each other. So you can get in touch with the Vervaeke Foundation, and you can get in touch with Awakening to Meaning, and you can, and it's growing. We put you in touch with resources. There's drop-in, like sanghas and dojos. There's courses. We can partner you up with other people who are offering powerful ecologies of practices, like my good friend Rafe Kelly. Other people, like Ira Stamberger, she has a course where she took some of this work that I do on wisdom and meaning, but she integrated it with, you have a personal project you want to undertake. And how can you integrate the cultivation of meaning with trying to go through the successful movement within your personal project? Like there's so many people have good faith and good talent, and that's how you can get in contact with it.
Thank you again, John.